we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next. It's the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Mike Blenkarn of a variety of different projects, but the main ones we're talking about in this interview are An Axis of Perdition, who have just put out their latest record, Apertures, on Apocalyptic Witchcraft Recordings. And I have bought a cassette, which I hope will be on its way towards me at some stage soon. Very cool album, varied, really creative, kind of unclassifiable extreme metal. There you go, I've classified it as extreme metal, but it's harder to put into a more precise box than that. But I'm going to play a track from the album at the end of the interview and a little clip before. I was actually originally planning to play an Axis track and play a track by the other band that we discuss in this interview, Nemorous, another one of Mike's projects. They are going to be, hopefully, I think, releasing their debut full-length record in 2025. They're actually booked to play at Fortress Festival in Scarborough, in Yorkshire, in England, which will be on the festival's the 31st of May and the 1st of June. It's going to be headlined by Agalloch and 1349. And Nemorous are going to be playing as part of that. And I believe, according to the website, it says that they're actually going to play the forthcoming album in full before it comes out. So I will put links in the description for everything. But yeah, An Axis of Perdition and Nemorous are the main projects that we talk about in this interview, as well as going through some of Mike's varied musical history from when he was just a teenager in his bedroom first making music. And I have an interesting little connection to Mike because his older sister is one of my dear friends, and she is someone that I've known for 25 years, I think, maybe. And I remember when she was telling me about Mike before I'd ever met him, and, about her younger brother and all the interesting music that he was making. And she was always speaking about him in these glowing terms and how proud she was and impressed about his creativity and all the interesting music that he was coming up with. And then I later heard it and I realized that he was really interesting, creative musician. And then I got to talk with him, actually met him, and interviewed him via email. But this is the first time that we've actually done an interview in real time. And yeah, we did it back in September. I held off on putting this out because I wanted to wait until there was new material. Now the Axis album is out. And so here is the interview in all of its glory. I will put links to all various social media for Axis and Nemorous. And if you want to follow me, you can do so at Tom Osman Sounds on all social media. If you want to see what I'm doing musically, you can go to tomosmansounds.com. And yeah, I guess that's all that needs to be said. So for now, Mike Blenkarn of An Axis of Perdition and Nemorous, take it away. Mike, we did do an interview before. We did an email interview back in 2021, and I interviewed you when you'd put out, I think at the time, your first release as Nemorous. Is that still your one Nemorous release? What is the status of Nemorous these days?
Well, we've been working on our debut album, so we've got studio time booked for December to put down the drums for that, and then our target is we're playing a big gig next year for an album launch event. So we've got the date scheduled, but we're just trying to make sure that we actually have the physical thing released by then. So so we've been very busy writing basically. We've got the album pretty much rehearsed now, so it's just a case of tightening up, refining it, like finessing it a little bit.
Yeah. And is that in terms of like the making of the album, the recording, is that all kind of on the schedule that you wanted, or have things been affected by sort of the extended void that was COVID?
Well, the progress of the album hasn't really been affected by COVID, but it was more the lineup change that we had after the EP was released. So we had to taking on a new guitarist and vocalist, and then we just spent a lot of time building up the live set with them just for presenting the EP. So it was we kind of had to backpedal quite a lot just to get back to where we were really. So there's a lot of time taken just with that, and then so then we went through a period of like promoting the EP through various shows and just kind of piecing together things in the background. So I think the last gig that we played was in Edinburgh in September last year, and after that we decided we were just going to lock down and not take on any more gig commitments and just focus on writing and rehearsing new material.
So I want to get into asking you various kind of questions about your insights and your experiences with
Sure.
making music in general. But I think as a kind of a starting point, what would be quite interesting is to sort of think about the music that you've done as a whole and to get back into some of your history. So if anyone looked you up on Metal Archives, for example, they would find, I'd say, a dozen, I don't know, 15, 16 different bands or projects that you've been involved with over the years. So when you think about, and I understand, certain things you've had more of a main role in, certain things, you're less at the center of the project. But if you think about all the different music you've been involved with, do you think there's like one description that you can give to everything? One sort of like overarching description of like your music that you make?
That's kind of very, very difficult because I kind of all of the music I make, I'm kind of going in two different directions simultaneously. So you've got things like An Axis Of Perdition and the kind of the work I do in kind of industrial music, which is a lot more kind of harsh and brazen, dystopian and gritty. And then there's the stuff like Nemorous, which is quite the opposite. It's very kind of verdant and kind of got much more of a kind of a nature-based aesthetic, really. And I think my own insight into that is the kind of the duality of growing up in Middlesbrough, because you have all that kind of there's the urban decay that you see in the town itself. There's the kind of the industrial landscapes around it, but then there's also like the Norfolk Moors and the kind of the countryside there. There was always kind of an escape from the urban space. So I've kind of always experienced those two worlds as quite separate things, really. So you've got that kind of grimy urban, dystopian kind of thing on the one hand, and the like that kind of escape into nature on the other side. And so I don't really feel capable of unifying those things or doing them together. So I work on one or the other depending on where I'm at in terms of my own headspace, really.
I think that concept of the dichotomy is really interesting. I'd like to get back to that, but I think before I jump too far ahead, now that you've talked about your upbringing in Middlesbrough, so it was really interesting for me when it comes to first hearing your music, because I'm good friends with your sister, and so she first like mentioned you like, oh, my younger brother is away making this interesting music. And it was sort of at that time, I'd obviously never met you. I just sort of had this image of you holed away in your room creating sort of experimental extreme metal. So, and then, Axis of Perdition, or when it first appeared, was it An Axis of Perdition, Axis of Perdition, or The Axis of Perdition? Because I kind of want to clarify these differences.
Yeah. When it first appeared, it was just Axis of Perdition. Then a couple of years in, we changed it to The Axis of Perdition for fairly spurious reasons, as to be said. It just felt like the right thing to do at the time. And then obviously we split up for a few years. So when we reformed, we thought, okay, let's put a slightly different twist on it again. So when we first agreed to reform, which was in 2018, which was quite a while before we announced it publicly, um, we said, okay, we'll call it An Axis of Perdition, and the rationale of that is that each new release we do from this point on is just going to be like completely self-contained, rather than doing the kind of sprawling, overarching narratives. It's like each album is going to be like a debut, so there might be kind of changes in personnel, changes in approach, all sorts of things. It's going to be like a fresh start each time, but within still kind of rooted in the kind of the musical oeuvre we've created already. So it's got that very kind of distinctive Axis sound, but the plan is to just kind of twist it a bit each time, so it's like a little bit skewed. I've kind of drifted off your original question, haven't I?
No, that was cool. I really like that conceptualization. That's very interesting. Well, and sticking with, I'm just going to keep saying Axis of Perdition now to avoid any confusion for myself. So thinking about that point when you first released music of that project, and would I be right in saying that would have been the split CD that you did in 2002? Was that your first release of music that you put out?
The demo. Yeah, that was the first thing we did as Axis. Before that, I'd been in a death metal band with Brooke from Axis that was called Mindthorn, which was very much what I'd consider kind of like demo metal, basically. So it was kind of quite a hodgepodge of different things, quite embryonic, pulling in different directions without much in the way of cohesion or kind of definition, just a kind of a bit of a gumbo of different things we liked without quite having an house to carry any of them off. So I think it's kind of a stage of kind of harvesting influences that most musicians will go through. So I think Axis emerged in a way that we kind of like riffled through loads of different approaches, and that was just something that kind of it did come out of left field for me. It was, I think I kind of started playing around with riff ideas I didn't think would fit in Mindthorn, even with its kind of sprawl of influences. Just cause, I don't know, it just felt a little bit different. And I think partly that will also be, well, for two things. One was that I was away at Stirling at the time studying, so we were kind of geographically separated. So I was kind of doing a lot of work on my own, and then, but without any means to record anything. So then going back and spamming the other guys with ideas all at once. And then the other major factor there was discovering home recording technology. Like I got an upgrade to my computer for my 20th birthday, and as part of that, I was able to actually record audio for the first time digitally, and that completely and utterly changed my the way I write music. Whereas before, I just kind of sit with a guitar and kind of noodle around. I very quickly set off on this kind of more integrated way of creating music, where the writing and the recording and the arrangement are all kind of parallel, kind of symbiotic process. So that, like, I'll be kind of writing and recording what I write at the same time, and trying out different parts and meshing it all together. So I was kind of having this quite profound paradigm shift purely on the technological side of what we were doing. And it just felt like a completely different way of operating to the kind of the traditional band setup that Mindthorn was doing. So I think I just kind of got sucked into that, thinking, okay, this will still be doing that band, and that'll be the traditional band thing. Whereas it's kind of a more experimental kind of way of working, and it's something I can get on with at home and just play. I mean, the element of play in that was very, very important. It was kind of, I got very, very sucked in. My studies went very, very downhill for a while.
Thinking about the previous band, you said it was Mindthorn was the band.
So Minethorn.
Mindthorn. Okay. There is a Mindthorn release.
2000 era Photoshop photo collage on the front. So it's
So
kind of how pixely it is on the background.
yeah. It's of its time.
Yeah.
So how long did Mindthorn run for, or how long were you part of the band?
It the original version of the band just lasted probably a couple of years, and I think partly because I mean I did eventually decide to step down, and that's just because Axis just absorbed all of my focus. Like once I had my little kind of personal playground of kind of putting everything together at home, suddenly that was much more exciting than just doing things the old-fashioned way in a rehearsal room. Um, which is kind of no reflection on the other guys. It was just I was yeah, it just completely captured my imagination, really. So the kind of the main thing I kind of took forward from Mindthorn was just my working relationship with Brooke, because once I'd started getting into this home recording stuff, and then he came into Axis to do the vocals, and then he got involved, and he got just as excited as I did about the possibilities of working independently that way. And so we were kind of both off, and we were both on the both very much on the same page, really.
And it seems like Axis has always been very conceptual
Yeah.
in terms of what you're trying to put across. Like it's the music, it's the art, it's the
Mhm.
titles, it's the whole kind of themes of the records,
Mhm.
both in terms of that conceptual aspect, but also the music, which also seemed incredibly complicated and
Mhm.
layered from the start. Where were you drawing inspiration from in particular for all of that?
Um, well, in terms of the kind of the aesthetics of it, we're kind of pulled in quite a lot of different influences early on that then kind of narrowed over time, really. So we kind of started off with lots of science fiction and horror influences. We wanted to have imagery and an aesthetic that kind of spoke to our kind of urban roots, really, because at the time it was still some extreme metal that was dabbling in kind of more of an urban look, but it was rarer than it is now. It seemed a natural reflection of kind of our upbringing, really. Um, though that said, as you where we like I came from easily the most middle class part of Middlesbrough, so it's not exactly a kind of
Well, the main streets.
urban grimness, yeah. Um, but the broader surroundings though, we kind of um, saw a great deal of deprivation, quite kind of impacted by that, and just kind of seeing what it meant socially, but also just it was it created some very kind of vivid impressions that we wanted to kind of build on, and that knitted together with a lot of kind of horror influences, like particularly so an author from Liverpool called Ramsey Campbell, who we both really liked. We found out when we first formed Mindthorn, there was a Ramsey Campbell collection of short stories from Middlesbrough Library, which Brooke had tried to take out and had never been able to get it out because it kind of someone had got it out and it had gone missing and never been returned. Guilty. So I'd had it for like ages and ages. He just came out like we were jamming in my room on a Mindthorn song, like just in my bedroom, and he clocked it and he was like, "You fucking kidding?" Like, so, but anyway, he wrote like his very early stuff is very kind of Lovecraftian, and that was kind of an influence as well. But he like the as his writing matured, he like really kind of took on more local colour, and as a Liverpudlian, there's much more of Liverpool and much more of the kind of the deprivation there and the urban decay. So that kind of it kind of resonated with us. And then also things like the Silent Hill games, or at least when we formed, there was only one of them out, I think, or the second one might have just come out. But, and like various films and things. And then also we were taking a lot of influence from kind of the peripheral bits of kind of Japanese culture that we were picking up at the time, just things like Akira or Tetsuo the Iron Man, things like that, like some of the kind of more readily available anime stuff and kind of more experimental things and David Lynch things and stuff. So the aesthetic did kind of take a little bit of time to come together, but it just seemed like it was just something that spoke to us that we didn't really feel like many people were engaging with in extreme metal at the time. It was like, and I know that this never really goes away, but just when an awful lot of the kind of the traditional imagery around like black metal in particular, though we don't identify with that particular genre, but it's like it was just kind of getting kind of very kind of generic and stagnant, and people like following a certain template or just trying to kind of emulate kind of what kind of Scandinavian bands are doing and stuff. And yeah, and we just wanted something a bit more idiosyncratic and distinctive, and that we felt more kind of personally invested in. In terms of the music, it's kind of similar to an extent in that we're kind of responding to things we wanted to hear that we weren't really seeing. I mean, I'm not like there were some bands who are kind of exploring dissonance that kind of predated us by a long time. You've got like Gorguts, for example, being a key one. But plenty, I mean, and then plenty of noise rock bands and what have you. But it was still seemed a bit kind of underexplored, like within a kind of more kind of black metal-y context. And so I think like because this is before like Deathspell and Mega kind of came out with their kind of listening work. They were still kind of doing the kind of Dark Throne worship stuff at the time, and it was before we kind of really heard what Blood Ox Nord were going to do. So we did feel like we're kind of operating in a bit of a silo to an extent, and so it was just there's just something about kind of dissonant and ugly chords that I just find very, very compelling. And particularly in that early period, I was just kind of exploring them in a quite intuitive way without really understanding what I was doing from a kind of theoretical perspective. I would just kind of explore different kind of hand shapes and just find any kind of combination of chords or sequences that made me kind of go, oh. So that was all I was looking for, just the kind of got like a totally visceral reaction. But there was, I think, things that were particularly important is so the kind of the ambition in terms of the kind of speed and intricacy and stuff like that very much came from Emperor, particularly kind of Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk, and with that kind of falling down the stairs quality it has. And then the first album by Kraft had come out, the black metal band from Sweden, and that had some quite gnarly dissonant chords, but particularly kind of on the higher strings, like just kind of tones ringing together in a kind of quite anxious, kind of tense way, and that I found really really compelling. And then slightly more left field influence, second Portishead album. The kind of the dissonance and the chord progressions on that I found incredibly eerie and haunting, and so I just thought I'll try and kind of siphon some of that vibe into the metal I was making. And I didn't really have a good sense of the broader kind of musical and cultural heritage that Portishead were drawing on for their own work. I didn't have that bigger picture or the kind of the I don't know. I just didn't have the broad understanding. I just knew that particular album just really struck a chord with me. So I mean, the first Portishead album was the second album I ever bought. But then the second one was, I don't know, just something about it. It's just so kind of bleak and harrowing. It was not just that I wanted the kind of the dissonance of it. I wanted that kind of dismaying energy that it had.
Yeah.
It just made me think that so something. There's something kind of quite psychologically quite. It sounds like music made by someone in a really kind of toxic psychological state, and it kind of influenced into the music, and wanted to talk about. Wanted to have that kind of depth and intensity and kind of feeling of real kind of dread and real kind of an aura of psychological damage, which and quite why I should find that a desirable thing. I don't know. It was just something that spoke to me and that I really wanted to kind of nurture and bring out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the heart of Axis, really. It's kind of you can talk about all the kind of like lots of different kind of musical influences and things that go into the films, but at the heart of it, it's kind of it's very much defined by a feeling that will like, come through either through my own kind of visceral response to the music, or just constantly pursuing that kind of traumatic feeling, like it. And I was just also very determined that it would be like a Gesamtkunstwerk, that everything would work together, that you wouldn't have like it wouldn't be let down by kind of ill-fitting artwork
Mm.
or anything. It would everything would be kind of conceptually and aesthetically ironclad, really.
Yeah.
And that kind of lends itself to the DIY kind of approach, because even though we didn't have the first idea what we were doing, and as a result, especially the early music, but it's so kind of obnoxiously unskilled in terms of production values and things, to the point of possibly qualifying as like some kind of outsider music. But it was the kind of the energy and intensity of being able to kind of get totally immersed in that and have control of everything. And that even though what came out of the other end was kind of very kind of unrefined and ugly and abrasive and stuff, it was also kind of very just very kind of concentrated and very real. Which so it's kind of like quite a kind of a punk value
Yeah.
with it. But that's yeah. I mean, we've just always been very kind of ready to do things in a DIY way. And like, for example, one thing I remember particularly when we were recording our first album, the Communion Method, Brooke's about 6'6", and we didn't have a mic stand, but my mum has a hat stand. So we kind of sellotaped the mic to the hat stand and so what we used, and it was just like, even that was exciting, because it was just like we're kind of like breaking all the rules and doing things our own way. We're still kind of producing some kind of result that we can put out into the world.
And thinking about the fact that you did have this DIY approach and that reflection you made there, that you felt like you were doing something that didn't really fit in with any kinds of trends at the time. You clearly had this sort of determination of vision. What kind of expectations did you have in terms of getting an audience for this, and how did you grow an audience over the years? Because I would imagine at this point you've got people who've been into the music for a long time that are sort of there with you in this little community. Like, how have you seen that develop over the years?
Well, as I said, when we first formed, we definitely felt like we were operating in a silo, and that's something that a lot of bands in the UK, like extreme metal bands, seem to like of our round about our kind of age bracket, seem to go through a similar thing. That like there just really wasn't a connected scene, so everyone was kind of operating in very kind of individual little pockets. So it was in that respect we had zero expectations. We had no idea what people would think, no idea if anyone would pay any attention. And it was so it felt like a complete shot in the dark. We sent out the demo to a load of labels, most of which didn't get back to us, but the one that did was Rage of Achilles Records from London, who were quite a new small label at the time, and they were just super enthusiastic, and that was already beyond our expectations to have like someone other than ourselves prepared to do anything with it. That was like a massive deal at the time, and it felt like kind of vindicating, because however much you feel like you're on the right track, there's always the risk of being caught with your trousers down, and artistically speaking. Then when that did come out, I think the key thing was it got album of the month in Terrorizer, and I think I think got quite lucky that it went to a writer who it just really clicked with, which is a guy called Jimmy Martin, who's he's a guitarist in a band called Teeth of the Sea.
Oh,
nowadays.
I know Teeth of the Sea. I mean, I don't know them personally, but yeah, I know that band.
Yeah. So that was and then once we had that kind of endorsement, it immediately took off from there. Like in terms of our kind of profile and the amount of interest we received, it was. I mean, it's really kind of telling what a different era it was, really, in the sense that kind of the print media still had that kind of clout at the time,
Mm.
compared to now when Terras hasn't even existed for a few years,
Yeah.
and kind of the way that we consume media has completely changed, and yeah, so it's very much. I think it feels quite serendipitous, really, that we're kind of arrived on the scene at the point that we did, with that kind of particular set of conditions. Because if we're just kind of coming out with that music now, I mean, quite apart from the fact that in terms of what other bands are doing, there's a completely different context. But just I'd find it very difficult to imagine like finding the audience that we've been able to maintain, uh, if we were starting afresh, just because it's so much more crowded. Um, and I think and I think that's very positive, really, because one of the really nice things about the way the metal scene operates now is just that so many more bands are doing that, taking that DIY approach, and are kind of really kind of freed by it and able to kind of like create things that the opportunity wasn't there before, and like the kind of the technology is so much more accessible, and it's less like both in terms of being able to kind of learn about the process, but just kind of financially, even if it's a case of people downloading crack software, or what have you, then it's like everything is much more within reach for
Mm.
people, who might have been kind of locked out of making music 30, 40 years ago through lack of privilege and lack of opportunities.
Yeah.
Um,
And so thinking about, I definitely want to get back to this point of DIY
mm,
opportunities, but I'd like to touch on something you mentioned earlier about this dichotomy that
mm,
you've recognized in yourself. So clearly, Axis was sort of drawing from the urban industrialized
mm.
aspect of your upbringing. When did you start to recognize that there was this other side that you wanted to represent creatively?
um, I think I'd had ideas along those lines, since before I even formed Mindthorn, just when we were just tinkering around in my bedroom with ideas and stuff. And I always kind of had ideas of doing something that was more in line with that kind of foresty black metal imagery. Like I kind of doodle imaginary band logos um, in my notebooks at college and things like that, and like write lyrics for songs that never existed. And just I was kind of doing a lot of that kind of, breaking that kind of initial imaginative primary and super doing something with it. And it was just because Axis happened to take off when it did that just kind of preoccupied me quite strongly for a few years. And kind of, so I just didn't get around to it for a while, because there wasn't as much time. But there's also been lots of I have an awful lot of unfinished music in my closet, really, like stuff going back 20 years and things. So there's a lot of things that I kind of got to a certain point, and then I kind of got distracted, and when I worked on something else, and kind of dropped the ball. And I've got I'm not very good at kind of maintaining my concentration on a single project for the long term. I kind of
Mm.
pop about, and I have kind of creative mood swings, basically. And I find I respond quite strongly to seasonality. So there's certain kinds of music I
Mm.
want to make in the summer, and other kinds I want to make in spring and winter and stuff like that. There's like some, like particularly with kind of nature influenced, more black metal kind of stuff. There's like things that you only get a certain time of year, like the smell after rain on pine trees or something that will just spark my imagination off. Um, or but at the same time, having like a foggy evening in autumn and the smell of the damp in the air and that kind of chill, that'll set off something else. And it's I'm quite I'm not very attentive really. I've just I've got into habits where I can work quickly on things, but it doesn't always it doesn't always lead to a finished product. There's a lot of music making that I do that is kind of more process based. And I think that's kind of okay. I think when I was younger, I got a lot more stressed about not getting things finished properly, but I realised there is value in having kind of a musical sketchbook
Mm.
and kind of being able to kind of play with ideas without necessarily thinking everything has to be everything has to be a finished song, everything has to be a unique project, everything has to have its own career where it goes from this album to this album to this album. It's like not every seed has to go into a full
Yeah, I
thing.
think that's very
It's
reasonable.
taken a long time for me to kind of wrap my head around that idea. So yeah, so there's a lot of that kind of nature-based black metal stuff I was doing just took years and years for me to kind of pin down.
Mm.
And I think partly that's because I went down such a rabbit hole in terms of the dissonance and kind of doing quite ugly kind of guitar stuff that it took me a long time to kind of build confidence with kind of more conventional melody and
Mm.
being comfortable with operating in a kind of much more kind of crowded field,
Yeah.
really, and still feeling like I had something to say that like added something that that kind of added value that made it kind of stand out really and have like a bit more depth to it. I really try and avoid as much as possible doing stuff that's just reactive, where it's like, oh, I've heard X album and I just went down a rabbit hole and made a load of stuff that just sounded like knockoffs. And think, well,
Yeah.
that's cool and all, but it's kind of, does anyone really need that? Or was it just that I needed to work through that and it was a good exercise? And sometimes that's enough. Um, yeah.
Now, in terms of what you said there about this concept of a musical sketchbook and having things that you've worked on that might go back 20 years,
Mm,
do you go back to previous, not completely formed and finished
mm,
work and go, "Ooh, I'm going to do something with that," or is it more that, or maybe you'll kind of like continue to work on something, or do you
mm.
treat that just as sketches that are going to be working away in your subconscious somewhere, and if you are going to finish something at this point, you're kind of going to start new up to a point?
It varies. I mean, I'll kind of if I'm working on something and I'm struggling for ideas, I might do a bit of fishing into the archives and see what might be in there I might have forgotten. And there has been plenty of times where I found a riff that I'd forgotten that I'd made, and suddenly I had the right spot for it, and it that helps the current idea to come together. And that's cool. I guess just some ideas age like wine and some age like milk, and that's
Fair.
that's just how it is. So I can think of a load of things off my head, none of which I can name because they're just kind of blocks of ideas and things. But then I can every now and again I think, oh, maybe there was something in that, and then I'll go back and listen to it and go, oh God, no. So, that was a wasted month or whatever. But, I think that's the other thing because I kind of hop between different states of mind quite a lot in terms of what I'm working on. I never entirely trust my judgment with something. If it just kind of pops out while I'm trying to work on something else, then I'm much more kind of comfortable with the idea of saying, okay, I'll just quickly record that and then I'll put in a file and then if I come back to it later, fine. It's like,
Yeah, it's not going to be completely lost.
yeah. And again, that's a great thing about just home recording, just being able to say, okay, I have this idea. I'll just spend 10 minutes before I have to go and make lunch or something, just knock it out and then kind of maybe come back to it in 3 months and go, oh, yeah, that was good. And now I'm in the right headspace to do something with it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it makes it a much more kind of a nice integrated practice because also I know that as long as I kind of observe certain minimum standards in terms of recording quality and performance and things, then I can feasibly demo an idea and it not just be a sketch. I could actually pick it up and paste it into something, and it'll be fine. And that lends itself to composing in quite a patchwork way, which is what I tend to do anyway. I'll kind of assemble loads and loads of bits and then play a lot with different combinations until things seem to work out.
And from thinking about that approach, do you then always, in one way or another, actually play through these things, whether live or in some other setting, or do you have certain things where you've constructed them and they exist in the sort of tapestry and you don't actually go back and perform them?
A lot of Axis is basically like that. I mean, there's some Axis songs where I'm not even sure that they would be physically possible. The way I've kind of linked together things, like the different jumps and shapes, it's just some very, very bizarre things. I think there's at least a couple of songs where I've actually recorded with different tunings and then just chops things in together and stuff. The stuff like that. And again, that's part of the delight of home recording, that you can experiment with things without worrying about their kind of playability. And and just kind of in terms of my own kind of technical competence, which is not great, and stamina and what have you. It's nice just to be able to kind of come up, create ideas where there isn't that pressure on them to be kind of fully performed afterwards. The problem is that has occasionally tripped me up where I've ended up having to play something that I've written and realised that I've done something completely stupid. There's
to make it completely impractical.
Yeah, well, there's one of the songs for the new Nemorous album. I originally wrote it for Woden's Throne, and I was just playing keyboard in that band, so I didn't really have to worry about stamina of card playing. So there's kind of loads of just relentless tremolo picking and kind of fiddly, like awkward chords, and it's a real bastard to play. And now I have to play it because it's going on the album, and so I tend to curse myself, and the other guitarist also tends to curse me quite a lot for writing, for not thinking through what I'm writing, just kind of creating a song that think, oh yeah, that feels great and that feels finished, and then I'll tab it out and it's going to be a massive pain. But I think that's a valuable lesson in of itself.
Yeah.
But it has held back Axis from doing kind of more live stuff. Not that we've really ever had much of an intention of doing that, just because we're so kind of invested in doing things that way and in the freedom it afforded to create kind of strange combinations and things. So the two times we did play live, we had to carefully pick the songs that we did for that reason. But the other problem I have with doing Axis Live is because it's meant to be this kind of whole evocative world building thing, was I was never really happy with the idea of like reducing it down to just a few guys on stage knocking out a song. I just wanted to be much more of a kind of, I think it's much more kind of like headphone music, more of a kind of immersive kind of experience, really.
Yeah, I guess, sometimes even just from the perspective of the visual side of things, it's like, you can have like really extreme music and then maybe you look at the back cover and you see a bunch of guys wearing double denim with long hair and just like this, it can look really, really cool, but it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of like hellish representation of stepping into the void as you might have got just from hearing the music.
It's a tricky tightrope to walk, because on the one hand, I'm really determined that everything has the right feel and the right look. At the same time, I'll feel like a total prick doing anything too kind of theatrical or flamboyant. So it can be tricky. Like especially I couldn't bring myself to do the like more black metal look or something like that. I just feel like a complete berg.
Well, getting back into black metal. So when I interviewed you about Nemorous, you may recall that I kind of naively said, "Oh, like you're a black metal band," and you kind of pushed away from that And you touched on that a little bit earlier just
Mm,
now when we've been talking about your sort of mixed feelings about the tag of black metal.
mm,
But then on the other hand, you mentioned Emperor being
yeah,
one particular influence. So
mm,
I'm not saying there's any contradiction in that, but clearly various different black metal music
mm,
has been influential and inspiring for you.
mm,
Um, but clearly, or I would suggest probably there's various baggage that is attached to the
exactly.
concept of
Yeah,
black metal. So I'm kind of curious because we never really got to expand on this in the last
mm.
interview. How do you feel about the tag of black metal, and what kind of baggage do you think there is attached to that? And so from that, why do you feel kind of like not so comfortable about
Mm.
referring to what you do as black metal?
Well, just as a kind of an initial point, really, I kind of have quite an old-fashioned view of black metal in that I just think of it, okay, black metal is it's metal with a satanic perspective. So rather than having any specific um, kind of sonic criteria to it,
Mm,
I think of it as satanic metal. Just sort of looking at the first wave of black metal in the 80s, it was like the lyrical content was the only thing unifying it, and that's just the conception of it that I've kind of grown up with, really. So um, the other thing following on from that is it comes with this, as you say, this baggage, which is all about being this kind of antisocial outsider, kind of at war with society, and kind of viewing the whole world through this very occult lens, with kind of much more investment in kind of like occultism and all that kind of shtick, and having the kind of look and things. And I just that it just I really I love the music, but that the baggage does not speak to me. I consider myself like a humanist, and I've got no particular interest in Satanism. I understand how the subculture operates, and I've kind of followed it for a very long time and listened to loads of music and collect loads of stuff. But there's a worldview in there that I just don't subscribe to, basically. So
mm,
I feel like it's kind of not really appropriate for me to kind of use that tag because it misrepresents where I come from, and it's also kind of it's not the preferred nomenclature now. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, I think the problem about this is that in terms of subgenres and all the different kind of boxes that we put things in, there isn't a coherent box for music that sounds like black metal that isn't about Satan and doesn't have that kind of lifestyle touch. So if you look at a band like Enslaved, who kind of came out of the kind of knowledge wave, there are like so many people pigeonhole them with black metal, and it's not. And you see interviews with guys in Enslaved, and they're not like these hateful, antagonistic outsider people, and they're just
Mm,
kind of quite spiritual people with a sense of humor. And it's just there, but there's all these kind of different branches and offshoots that grew out of the sound and the culture around black metal that just don't fit in that kind of particular mold. And there's no helpful catch-all for that. And so I completely understand that purely for the sake of expedience, a lot of stuff around black metal is called black metal because it's an easy reference point. I just don't think it bears close examination. But it's just one thing I'm quite particular about, particularly in terms of if it's other people kind of talking about my own music. Um,
mm.
I just try and make sure things are taken in the appropriate context. And so that just kind of trailed off there, but I think you kind of,
Yeah, I think I definitely get the point. So thinking about, and writing about music, I get very frustrated with genre tags because a lot of the time it does feel kind of unsatisfactory. And a lot of the time, I just don't know. It's like I listen to something and I go, is this black metal? Is this doom metal? Is this death metal? Is this like, and there's a lot of the time, bands will be combining different elements as well. So what do you do in the end? Do you say it's just extreme metal? It's atmospheric metal? What are kind of terms that you feel comfortable with in terms of representing your music? I mean, I think you mentioned atmospheric metal last time.
Yeah, I mean,
If people call
it's
you,
not.
if people say your music's pagan metal, does that bother you? Or
Um, Again, it's not massively objectionable, I guess. I mean, I know a lot of the stuff that Widenstone did, particularly before I joined, could be classified as that. But it's again, it's I think you have to have if you're going to use a description like that, you need to have the kind of the furniture for
mm,
that for
yeah.
that tag. So if you are going to describe it as pagan metal, and it's like okay, then what particular kind of branch of paganism are you representing? What's going on there? So it's kind of if if a band are actually doing something that kind of engages with a kind of legitimate strand of pagan culture or whatever,
Mm,
then kind of great. But it's if it's just being used as a kind of woolly catch-all for something, then that's just not really that satisfactory. But again, unfortunately, there's very few terms that are. So more and more, I think the term black metal primarily benefits retail. Anything else at this point because it's just like okay, there's that box that we can put that stuff in. And it's like if you're looking in a catalog for something, then maybe it's a handy starting point. I don't know. And just
yeah.
it's kind of it's it is sometimes I want to stand back from it and say like what is this box even for and does it really mean anything at this point or you know like do we really need it
Yeah.
and we can not just say okay this I mean I know when I worked for Terrorizer a bit in the kind of late 2000s and I always try to avoid that thing where you say oh so and so sounds like a bit of band A and band A with a bit of band C so that kind of checklist so I always try to find a like whether I succeeded or not I always try to find a way to actually describe musically what they were doing it's kind of a bit more kind
Mm,
of a bit more engaged and meaningful and just kind of like surface level kind of references. Yeah, it's just yeah, just saying all of those boxes are for expedience, and
mm.
I don't know. I question their value at this point, really.
Yeah, no, as someone who is prone to philosophizing, I'm very happy to kind of give that serious thought. It's just, yeah, every time I write about a band, I have to go like, right, is there a way that I can avoid as much as possible talking about genres? And like
Mm,
one of my favorite bands when it comes to extreme music is Today Is the Day, who
yeah,
don't really fit any categorization
yeah,
whatsoever. I mean, you can throw about 10 different genres in there and you can
mm,
talk about all kinds of different bands, but you can never say they are this or they are that.
mm,
And so I don't know. I mean, I guess some people look for a kind of specific style and go, oh, yeah, I like stuff that fits into this category.
mm,
And other people kind of looking for the opposite. They're constantly wanting things which are going to be novel in
yeah.
one way or another. And then, I'm not saying everyone has to fall on one
Mm.
extreme or the other.
I think it's a good mark of a kind of a real kind of distinctive original voice as a band where you get those bands who their brand becomes a genre in of itself, like
Mm,
Neurosis, for example, where other people sound like Neurosis, they don't sound like other people kind of thing. So,
yeah, that's a good example.
I
Um,
mean, Today's the Day is another one. So,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I love Neurosis as well. Yeah, I remember actually the first time I ever listened to them, I think it was kind of like a weird introductory point. It was A Sun That Never Sets, which is sort of like when
mm,
they went very ambient and
yeah,
less sonically overwhelming. And I remember being
mm,
very confused by the album at first, but I was intrigued enough that I kept persevering, and then I ultimately liked that album, and then found other stuff of theirs that I liked even more.
mm,
Um, I wanted to ask you a kind of a practical question
mm,
to draw from your various experiences when it comes to releasing music. So, from the perspective of someone now who wanted to put something out, thinking about what you're doing musically, and let's
mm,
just say hypothetically, I mean, not so hypothetical, seeing as you've got the Nemorous release that's coming out, but you've, when I say you, anyone releasing music at this point has got a variety, hypothetically, depending on cost, of options of how they want to put something out. So there's obviously vinyl exists. It's pretty expensive, but a lot of people love it. CDs are still out there. CDRs are possibly an option too. There's cassettes. There's the, using something like Bandcamp where you sell the music digitally. Obviously, you've got all the different streaming services. I mean, how do you look at all of that in terms of making a decision about what kind of formats am I going to put something out on, whether it's the financial considerations, how much you think people are actually going to hear this, how much you think people care about these formats? Yeah, what is there to consider?
One of the interesting things about this is that between me and Brooke in Axis, we've got totally different views on this. Because as you can see in the background, I buy a lot of CDs. That's my kind of medium of choice. I still buy a lot now. I mean, in terms of, I'm kind of less invested in analog formats, but I appreciate that there's something a lot of people really want. My primary consideration with that is that compared to the earlier records we did, we have to start thinking about how the album will divide up into sides, like how long it needs to be for kind of good audio fidelity before you kind of start to lose quality. So like some of the early Axis albums would be too long for a single LP, but if we wanted to do a double LP, it would kind of be a bit of a stretch for the material as well. And then think, is that financially viable? Would people really want that? And then as a listening experience, something like Axis, if it was, so the deleted scenes from the Transition Hospital album is 55.5 minutes or something like that. So that's definitely way too long to be a single LP without being terrible quality.
Yeah,
really awful. But as a double LP, it's quite patchy. And then because the music is trying to create this kind of immersive, encapsulating experience, how disruptive is it to be getting up every like 15 minutes or so to flip an LP? Like, is that what we? And I kind of think in some ways, it doesn't happen very much, but every now and again, someone will ask about like an LP of that album. And I think, well, firstly, that it's kind of prohibitively expensive to do that. We'd have to find someone who's prepared to fund it and are able to release it. I don't think we could manage a project on that scale ourselves. But also, that's moving away from the kind of experience the album was intended to be. So, in fact, I think if I wanted to do that album on an analog format, I'd probably just do a really long tape and have the album repeat on both sides. That would be optimal for me, really. So just so you don't have that kind of that interruption of the mood. Similarly, another big influence on Axis and one of my favourite bands is Esoteric.
yeah,
and I think they're made for like either listening on CD, which is how I tend to listen to them with their kind of double disc albums, or just listening digitally and being able to experience this Rasprog album in one. I think that's optimum. I bought one of their albums on vinyl, which is the Maniacal Veil, and it's a brilliant album, but it's a triple LP. And so and they're such an immersive band that I got so annoyed by how often I was getting up and flipping the vinyl. I said, I just want to listen to this as a block. It's like, I don't like the idea of fixating too much on one format at the expense of the music, really. So it's like, granted, if you're doing an album that works for LP, brilliant. And I have done, but I've set out to write something that's specifically for vinyl, that's fine. And so the Nemorous album is going to be on LP, so we've written with that in mind, and it's got two kind of defined halves that will fit on a single LP. So but snugly, but it'll get there. So I'm a skeptic about kind of format evangelism, so being a specific advocate for vinyl or cassette or whatever. I think really the ideal thing would be for the album in question to dictate the medium it suits, and for that to be the finished product, whatever that happens to be. And I know that there's, I mean, particularly with vinyl, there's also like kind of supply chain issues which aren't vastly interesting to talk about, but they're a factor. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, so that's kind of awkward. I mean, and just going back to where I started to this point, when I said that me and Brooke were on separate pages for this, Brooke has gone totally digital. He sold all his CDs.
Oh.
Like, he sold everything. He does Bandcamp and Spotify, whatever. He does everything online now. So we had like long debates about, do we actually need to go down a label route? Do we need to do physical media? And I'm still kind of I'm still a collector of stuff, and he's kind of ascended to a higher plane of listening or something. Or at least that's how it feels sometimes in the conversations we have about it.
But
Um,
what does he think about the matter of the value that people place in the music? Because I do think that there's definitely an argument that you can remove physical media, but you can still have something like Bandcamp where people go, I want to have this album. They pay for it, they download it, they own it, and they've kind of invested in it. And therefore, I think there's a good argument to say that they're probably going to value it more than if it's on Spotify and I can listen to it, I can skip it, I can play it on a playlist. I mean, what is he and what do you think about that issue of the potential perceived value for the audience?
I think he still appreciates the kind of that kind of value-based relationship that is there to be nurtured in term, even in kind of digital media, just through having that relationship and then having other ways of ensuring that the bands are supported and they have a relationship with their listeners, like whatever that might be, like I don't know, whether that's kind of merch or
Mm.
not that we do this, but I know some of the bands are kind of experiment with like kind of Patreons and things like that. So they're offering an alternative route for people to provide financial support to band without accumulating physical media, and I can totally respect that. I mean, I've got a couple of bands or musicians I make a monthly donation to their Patreon, and I'm kind of happy with that. If that's kind of the if that's the optimal way for me to show my support to them, then I'm totally happy to kind of meet a band on their own terms. With that, I think that's totally cool. And I also do see the importance of that and kind of appreciate the way that kind of the endless availability of streaming can be a devaluing influence on the music. It's kind of like hollows out the kind of the depth of the experience. It's just you know, kind of music on tap. It's
Yeah.
it becomes a different thing, and it's kind of more of a functional thing. And I know some people have that kind of relationship with music, and that has kind of come to dominate. And I know I kind of operate from a point of being quite invested in quite a nerdy subculture, and I'm totally cool with that. Um, I think the other big issue that I've been kind of thinking about more with kind of physical media versus digital media is the kind of environmental impacts recently. So kind of looking into so obviously there's all the kind of the plastics that go into manufacturing, but also I know that the idea that all digital music is cleaner has been kind of debunked now, that people are more aware of how much power is actually required to sustain the like servers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of worms, I guess.
Yeah, very often there's no easy solution. It's like, like you mentioned there with the environmental aspect, you can say, okay, we want to be mindful of this consideration. And then when you dig into the topic, you go, I thought there was going to be like a simple ethical way of doing things, but it's often very tricky. Now, to talk about social media would be, again, potentially going into a big can of worms. But to sort of wrap things up and thinking about the fact that you've got this new material coming out, do you have a title for the forthcoming album?
For Nemorous, no, we don't, not yet. I haven't actually thought about that a great deal. I think because we're still writing lyrics and finalizing song titles. So it could still be that we take one of those to use for the album. I'm kind of slightly annoyed now that the EP was self-titled, because now we can't do that again. But
you feel like you can? I mean, it's been done before.
Yeah.
You can make that your thing. It can be like Peter Gabriel. It's always eponymous. But yeah, I was just curious. There's no pressure to find out a title. But from that point of view of the album being on its way, I have a feeling, I could be wrong about this, that you're not really like a social media guy.
And it's not. I'm not desperately anti-social media. I'm not particularly savvy with it, and I find that the kind of the effort required to maintain a social media presence is quite a kind of quite a drag. It's quite tiring.
Yeah.
So I know I don't really make the best use of it for music. But at some point, I was genuinely thinking, like, for kind of different projects, do I just need to find some kind of PR person who will manage that stuff for me? Just as a practical thing, because I know it's an important part of how music operates, and kind of making sure that you reach listeners these days.
Yeah.
And I'm just not. I do not have the nous. I'm kind of I'm just kind of a little bit lost in the social media landscape, really.
Yeah. I can relate to that. Like I sort of quit everything a while ago. And then when I started doing stuff myself, so whether it was my own music or I started doing more writing or podcasting, whatever, I decided, okay, now there's value in me having these platforms again, because I'm actually promoting something.
Yeah.
But now in the position I'm in, I do find myself a lot of the time going, how much time is it really worth me investing into doing a post? And you then get obsessed with, you have likes or how many people have seen it, and you think, but what does it actually translate into? It's very difficult to quantify it. But thinking about what you're doing, for anyone listening to the podcast, what in general would you think would be the best way or the most helpful way to people to keep track of what you're doing? Like, let's say with Nemorous, how would people know when there's a release date announced for the album? I mean, I guess people can follow the band on Bandcamp, but then if they do that, there's only Nemorous. Is there a way for people to be aware of everything that you're doing, or is it all sort of existing separately out there?
It's all existing separately, really. I could do something to kind of integrate things forward. In the 2000s, we had a message board with all different bands on it, so it was just kind of compartmentalized for different discussions each, and it was. But that once things like Facebook and stuff took off, it just kind of died out. So, and when we've kind of moved over to doing things, it is primarily Facebook that we tend to use music promotion. It's like there hasn't been the functionality there to kind of do things in a convenient way. And also, I think particularly now that you're kind of working with algorithms that might kind of penalize you for posting too much and things like that, then it actually makes more sense for each musical entity to operate independently, just so you don't get clunked out. I mean, it's difficult enough to kind of be seen anyway.
Yeah.
One thing I've really noticed in Facebook in the last couple of years is just how much more of an avalanche of bot-generated content and spam. Just there's so much more of that than anything I'm interested in or people I want to talk to, and it just seems to have been saturated with that in quite a short space of time. I mean, I know there's always some kind of content forced on you, but it just seems to have gone absolutely wild. Yeah, but then with trying to kind of maintain all profiles separately, then it can end up being a great deal of work. So I'm not really maximizing any of those either. So at least with Nemorous, we have an Instagram as well, which is linked. So you do you do kind of get content on there, but I haven't got around to doing that with Axis or anything else yet. I think I've just been more. I'm always kind of more focused on the next thing I'm working on. And,
Yeah.
I'd rather given that the older I get and the more that work comes to kind of predominate, the more kind of pressure it is to decide where I'm gonna like what's the best use of my time that's going to make me happy. And it's not really going to be doing stuff on social media. It's going to be the actual kind of creative work. That's where the satisfaction is. I mean, I kind of lack control over who will get to hear it in the end. But that's one of the reasons why I'm still continuing to work with labels. Quite apart from the fact that a lot of the people I work with now are friends.
Yeah.
I don't want to get sucked into the admin
Yeah.
about making music. I just want to make the music.
Well, Mike, I don't think that there is anything to be criticized in that perspective. I fully respect that. And yeah, if anything, like in recent times, I've definitely seen moments where I am sort of getting sucked into the admin and the social media side of things. And, you know, there can be an element of it that is productive, but I don't think it would be ultimately doing myself any damage if I did just spend more of my time doing something creative rather than like posting something about doing something creative. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, like if you don't create something that you find value in, then kind of everything else is really a bit of a wasted effort, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Mike, it was great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again for the first time in a decade and a half.
Yeah. No, well, thank you for taking the time. I'm more than happy to chat about stuff. And yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really it's cool to sort of learn a bit more about the history and to also pick your brain about these various different subjects. And yeah, I will be looking forward to hearing the record when it comes out. What have you got? Have you got thoughts about shows coming up?
We have a show coming up on February the 1st next year, which is it's just been announced in the last day or so. Which it's like an all day. We're playing it with Barshasketh headlining, and that's going to be at Rebellion in Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to, unless something comes up in the meantime, that's going to be that's our next gig really. So we'll definitely be debuting a good chunk of new material for that. And so far, we've only played one song from the album a couple of times. Once of which was at the first Fortress Festival, and I managed to break two strings during the song. So I don't really feel like we presented that one properly.
Yeah. Well, you've got several months to make sure that you're in the best possible position to be playing the songs live. Awesome. All right, Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best.